Hi, this is Scott. Welcome to the Tall Woodworker. In this video, I'm going to create a crosscut sled for my new table saw. Stick around, I'm going to show you how I did it. So this is my old crosscut sled for my old table saw. Now, one thing to note is typically when you get a new table saw, you're going to need to create all your jigs all over again. And I'm going to have to do that with this one in particular. So while I'm going through the process of building a new sled, I want to address a few issues that I've had with my old sled. Number one, the base is MDF. Now, MDF is a great material. It's nice and sturdy, it's flat, it's fairly robust. However, my shop is in a garage, and so I have to deal with moisture and sometimes rain coming from the door when we raise it open and close it, and if I get any moisture on MDF, you might as well just get rid of it. It swells up, it loses its structure, just not a good time for that. So that's one thing that we're going to address on there. Number two is the rear fence for this really doesn't need to be the entire width. Remember that the rear fence is literally there just to keep these two halves together. So I'm going to reduce the distance. I do like the extension that I put on here I basically can go up to about 11 inches on the left side, and on the right side I can get up to about 23 inches with this extension on here. So it's been really good to have the ability to do both. However, I don't always need this extension. So want to find a way to get rid of that, or to alleviate that. Not get rid of it, just change it. The clamp I have on here is great for getting down on a board that might be too small and I might get my hands too close to the blade. However, if I put too much clamping force on here, it will actually cause the rear fence to bow back just slightly, and I'm just too afraid that that's going to get rid of square. One last thing is the height of this rear fence was dictated by these swings that I have on here. And because of that, not sure if you can see, but I've actually cut all the way through this wood fence when I have the saw blade up to its maximum height. The only thing holding the two halves together on this side is this double track. So we're going to fix all of these problems on my next revision, specifically for my new saw. So for starters, we're going to be using Baltic birch plywood as the base for this instead of the MDF. This is 3/4 inch, and this is the high quality stuff that you can get at your hardwood lumber stores, not your big box stores. It's flat, there's several plies, it's all solid wood in here. Most of the stuff that you find at your big box stores is going to have voids, might be a little bit bowed or curved. I really wouldn't recommend that for something for a jig. So I've actually got 2 sheets of this 24 by 30 inch Baltic birch plywood that we're going to use to make this sled. Most of it's going to be used for the base, and then some of the remnants will be used for the fences. I wanted to address the hold down clamp that I had on here. And after going back and forth for a while, I decided to be just using some T-track. So we're going to lay 2 rows of T-track into the base of this that I can use for hold down clamps on either side of the blade. Now, I don't know how many of you remember my straight cut jointing jig. If you don't remember me building this, I'll have a link up in the corner to the video where I made this. My main problem was that I had to remove so much material to fit the T-track in on this, there wasn't very much material left for the screws to go in. Now, I have fixed it on here by epoxying it together, but I'm not going to make that same mistake twice with this one. So my original plan was to use these aluminum miter runners so that I didn't have to worry about cutting my own. But once I decided I wanted the T-track in there, thought about it for a bit, and decided that we're going to go back to using wood runners. And the only reason for that is, number one, this piece of, I don't know if it's mahogany or hickory, I think it's mahogany, it's nice and straight grain, and I haven't had any problems with my old sled. Number two, I can lay the T-track right over the miter runners and screw directly into it, sandwiching all 3 pieces together. So we're going to use wood runners for this sled again as well. For the extension portion of the fence, I've got something a little bit more unique going on here. Instead of using the double T-track that you see on this one, I'm going to be using this double track here. This has a single T-track slot as well as a miter slot in there. Now you might be thinking, why do you need a miter slot on a crosscut sled, especially one that goes this direction? Well, I've got this miter bar material with a lot of screw holes in there, and I'm going to use this to make an extension. With this in here, I should be able to extend it out an entire foot when I need it, and when I don't need it, I can either close it back up or remove it out completely. And then it still has the T-track that I can use for my stop system. And for the stop system, rather than using the swing stops, I'm going for the Cat's Moses zero deflection stop block. This is a lot of stuff to do, and I don't even know if this is going to work out the way I want it to, so let's get cutting. The board I had for my runners was already the right width, but if it wasn't, I would have planed it down until it was loose enough to slide back and forth, but tight enough to avoid lateral movement. I measured the depth of my miter slots, adjusted my fence to be slightly less than that depth, and cut a series of runners. A little test fit, and then I cut them down to the appropriate length. Next, I cut the base of the sled to the width I wanted. 2 feet seems to be the typical width of a sled like this. The waist piece will later become the rear fence. Now I figure out where I want the blade to go. I end up choosing to make the right side just a little wider than on the left. That way I can maximize the length of the extension wing. I move my fence to the edge of the base to lock it in place, and I'll keep it there until the runners are installed. Here I'm marking out the locations of the miter slots. I then transfer those markings to the top surface to mark the location of the T-track. Time to route out the dados for the T-track. I had put a router table in the extension wing of the table saw so I can use the same fence for the router. This worked out really well. After a quick test fit, I can pre-drill the holes for the T-track using a self-centering bit. I grabbed some spare change from my pocket and put it in the miter slots to raise the runners slightly above the table. This will ensure that during the glue up, all of the pressure is on the runners, not on the table. This also helps prevent glue from getting on the table surface. I apply a thin bead of glue on the runners, then spread it out a bit. I use the fence as a guide, then lower the base of the sled on top of the runners. Then using the pre-drilled holes from before, I screw down the T-track through the sled base and into the runners. This method allowed me to keep working and not have to wait until the glue to dry on the runners. I use a hand plane to create a slight chamfer on the runners. This does not affect their accuracy at all, and it allows for the sled to more easily drop in place into the miter slots. I apply some paste wax on the bottom of the sled and on the runners. Not only does this protect the sled, it also protects the aluminum surface of my table saw. And it also makes the sled slide much more easily. Now time to make the rear support. I cut this wide enough to support the 2 halves of the sled, but narrow enough so that I can still access the ends of the T-track. Then I mark out a reference line underneath the sled and pre-drill and countersink the holes. I made sure that the screws were not in line with where the blade will go. I made that mistake on my first sled. I apply some glue to the rear fence, screw it in place, and then we'll set this sled off to the side. I cut down 2 pieces of plywood, so the width will be about a 1/4 inch more than the maximum height of the saw blade. I spread out some glue on both pieces, then I use the clamp it to a straight level trick to make sure that when the glue dries, the face of the fence will be as straight as it can be. I'm mostly concerned with the area that the level is covering. The overhang will be cut off later. After the glue is dry, I put it on my straight line jig to square up one edge. There's a card in the upper right corner of the video showing how I built this sled. I then used that edge on the fence to square up the opposite edge. Okay, there's a lot going on here. First, I'm making sure that this cutoff is wide enough that with the stop, there will be enough left to support a cut. Then, I use that cutoff to measure the final length of the fence. After cutting the fence to near final length, it's time to attach the track. First, I clamp a board to the face of the fence. This lets me line up the track so it will be flush to the face of the fence. I clamp the track to the board to lock it in place, pre-drill some holes, and then send in a few screws. After removing the reference board, the track is perfectly lined up with the face of the fence. Take the fence to the router to put a small chamfer on the bottom. This creates a dust channel to make sure dust won't affect the accuracy of any of my cuts. Now I cut off what will be the extension wing from the rest of the fence. The track is aluminum, so you can use wood cutting tools. Just be sure to wear eye protection, since it does send aluminum chips everywhere. I use some glue and brad nails to attach the extension wing support, then drive a few more screws for good measure. Now for the most critical part of this build, lining up the fence. I start by screwing down one end of the fence with a single screw. This will be the pivot point for my adjustments. Next, I cut the kerf in the sled about 2/3 the way down. I can then use the blade itself as a reference with a 90-degree square to adjust the fence until everything is lined up. Now here's my big mistake on this build. See that ruler? Yeah. That's not actually square at all. It's a couple degrees off, but I don't realize it at this time. I measure so many times to get this perfect, not knowing the error. I even bring out a second ruler to double check my work, and guess what? That one's not square either. But when two rulers give you the same reading, they must be right, right? I ended up using the 5-cut method 3 times to get it properly lined up. I'll leave a card in the upper corner to a good video on the 5-cut method. I was so frustrated at my mistake, I never hit record on my camera. And here you can see the 4 holes that were used to try to get this squared up. But now that it's properly squared in, I can send in more screws to lock the fence in place. Finally, it's time for that extension wing. I put the miter bar into the miter slot on the track and lock it into place on the extension with a couple of set screws. On the main sled, I use a wing nut to lock in the adjustment. When everything is lined up and locked in, the stop moves fairly easily to the extension, and now I can repeatedly cut longer boards. When it's not needed, the extension can be completely removed from the sled. And there it is, the Mark II version of my Crosscut sled for my new table saw. I had a lot of fun building this and learned a lot while building this as well. Number one, I learned not to trust my square. That is obviously not square. So yeah, we're getting rid of that thing. This older, cheaper square was actually much more accurate than that thing. So I'm not going to be using that anymore. I'm really glad that I incorporated all the features that I talked about earlier in the video. The T-track with the hold-down clamp is absolutely fantastic for being able to hold down material while not deflecting my fence. The shorter rear fence in terms of narrower, but also the taller front fence. I can now make a full-size cut in here without cutting into the aluminum track. That was a big issue that I had with my old saw. By far the thing that I love most about this is this extension right here that allows me to get up to 27 inches of crosscut capacity repeated on this thing. And when I don't need it, I can just completely remove it and stash it away. So that's absolutely fantastic. I really hope that there was something about this video that you found useful for your own crosscut sled build. Every crosscut sled is going to be different. There's no question about that. So I just hope that maybe something that I didn't hear can inspire you in yours. So what I ask is, leave a comment. Tell me what you liked about this design. Tell me what you hated about this design. Tell me something that you think I could have done better, something that you would have changed. I'm really looking forward to hearing other people's opinions. This will not be the last crosscut sled that I make, even for this table. I'm already looking at a smaller sled for when I do boxes. I don't necessarily need something that's this big for that. So I'm already looking at other design options for future sleds. So I do hope that you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notification icon so that you get alerts when I post new videos. As of recording this video, I'm at about 37 subscribers. Not too bad, still looking to grow my channel out, and I'm gonna try to be posting more videos more frequently now that it's starting to get nicer out and I can actually have my full workshop back. One more thing before I go, if you haven't already, be sure to check out my video where I built this straight line jig that I used to edge joint the fence on this one. I'll be sure to put a link for it somewhere over here. And until next time, thanks for joining me in my shop.